Korean Mafia. Boss married his mistress at midnight. Then his black wife played a video for the guests. The vow was 43 seconds in when the lights died, and in the soft black interval between one breath and the next, every guest in the ballroom of the Banyan Tree Club above Namsan understood that something far older than electricity had just walked through the door. It was 11 minutes past midnight on the 19th of November, and Kang Min-jae, 51 years old, the man the southern districts of Seoul had stopped naming aloud since the autumn of 2017, was standing beneath a canopy of 47,000 white roses, flown in from Kunming that very morning, his hand wrapped around the hand of a woman half his age, watching the giant LED screen behind the officiant bloom into a color he had not authorized, in a sequence he had not approved, at a moment that did not belong to him. The bride at his side, Cha Yu-na, 26, the only daughter of a man whose name appeared on 3 different National Assembly Committee rosters, had not yet turned her head. She was still wearing the rehearsed smile that had cost her family the better part of a year and the better part of a reputation. The officiant, a retired Supreme Court justice, paused with the practiced patience of a man who had learned, across 4 decades of private ceremonies, that interruptions almost always corrected themselves within 30 seconds. The screen flickered once, twice. Then it settled, with a quiet finality, into a single still image. A hospital corridor, the 14th floor of the Asan Medical Center, dated the 3rd of June, 11 years and 4 months before this night. And somewhere in the 7th row, a crystal glass touched a porcelain saucer with the gentleness of a person who had been waiting a very long time to set it down. Min-jae did not look at the screen. He looked at the door. He looked at the door because he already knew, in the part of a man that knows before the mind permits the knowing, who would be standing there, and what she would be holding, and exactly how long she had waited for this precise arrangement of crystal and politicians and underworld captains and cameras to gather itself into one room before she pressed one button. For 11 years and 4 months, he had told himself she was somewhere quiet, somewhere humid, somewhere far enough from a Seoul phone number that the distance would do the forgetting for him. He had told himself the wire transfer had been generous. He had told himself the non-disclosure had been ironclad. He had told himself that the woman who had once lifted him from a man with 800,000 won in a savings account, and a knife wound weeping through the lining of his coat into the chairman of the Hanseo Group had understood, somewhere quietly and finally, that he had outgrown the version of himself she had loved. He had told himself, and he had believed himself, the way powerful men believe themselves, which is to say the way a man believes a weather report he has paid for. Adaeze Folake Kang, 48 years old, had been standing at the threshold of the ballroom for perhaps 90 seconds before anyone noticed her. She wore a charcoal wool coat, ankle-length, buttoned to the throat, and beneath it the dress she had bought in Lagos in the autumn of 2009 for the dinner at which Min-jae had first told her, in front of his mother, that he intended to marry her. In her right hand she held a small black remote, no larger than a hotel keycard. In her left, a manila envelope, sealed, marked with no name and no return address. She did not move. She did not need to. The room moved around her, the way rooms always move around the one person in them who has already decided that this particular evening will not be survived by everyone equally. Of every 12 men inducted into the Hanseo Group between 2003 and 2017, 11 would live to see 40. The 12th, almost without exception, would be remembered as a cautionary parable about loyalty, and the parable would always be told by Min-jae himself at a private dinner with a glass of Huayo 41 in front of him and his right hand resting flat on the lacquered table, the way a surgeon rests his hand on a chart he is about to read aloud. He had told the parable so many times that, somewhere around his 45th birthday, he had begun to believe he had written it. He had not. The parable had been written, line by careful line, in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Mapo, by the woman now standing in the doorway, on nights when the man she loved came home with blood on the inside lining of his coat and refused to say whose. The detonation, when it came, did not come as an explosion. It came as a photograph. The first image dissolved, after a long-held beat, into a second. A wire transfer receipt, 300 million won, dated the 11th of October, 14 years ago, drawn on a numbered account at a private bank in Singapore, payable to a holding company registered in the name of Cha Yu-na's father, then a deputy director at the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, now a 3-term assemblyman whose face appeared on the 7 o'clock news with the regularity of weather. The room did not yet gasp. The room was still for the moment, deciding whether this was a joke arranged by Min Jae himself. The kind of joke a man at the summit of his life sometimes stages about the path he took to climb it. The deputy chairman of the Hanseo Group, Seo Tai-hoon, Min Jae's sworn lieutenant of 22 years, the man who called him Hyung-nim in private and Hojang-nim in public, set his small glass of soju down very slowly and did not pick it up again for the remainder of the evening. The image dissolved again. A third receipt. A fourth. A spreadsheet, columns aligned with the patience of a forensic accountant. A surveillance still from the lobby of the Joseon Palace in Yeoksam, dated 9 years ago, showing Cha Yu-na, then 17 years old, in conversation with a man whose face had been carefully blurred and whose watch, a Patek Philippe Calatrava with a salmon dial, had not. Min Jae's own wrist, beneath the cuff of his hand-stitched morning coat, carried that same watch tonight. He had been wearing it the first time he met her, 3 years ago, at a charity gala in the Shilla, where she had asked him, with the precise hesitation of a girl who had practiced the hesitation in front of a mirror, what time it was. The bride at his side made a small sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when she realizes that the room she had entered as the protagonist has, without her permission, and without her consultation, reassigned her to a smaller role. Min Jae's right hand closed around her right hand. He was not aware that he had done it. He became aware only when she pulled her hand free, and the pulling free was not the pulling free of a frightened young bride, but the practiced disengagement of a person who had rehearsed, in some quiet private place, exactly how she would step away from him if the evening required it. He looked at her then, and he saw, for the first time in 3 years, what his oldest friend, Tai-hoon, had been trying to tell him from the second month of the affair. That the girl was not a girl. That the love was not a love. That the future he had been promised was a stage set built in a warehouse in Ilsan, and trucked into his life one careful piece at a time. The officiant, with the quiet dignity of a man who had presided over the divorces of 3 former presidents, closed the small leather book in his hands and took one deliberate step back from the dais. He did not leave the room. He simply ceased to participate in it. The screen showed a 5th image. A handwritten letter in Cha Yu-na's hand, dated 18 months before she had ever spoken a word to Min Jae, addressed to her father, in which she described, in the calm and tidy script of a girl who had attended Daewon Foreign Language High School, and then Yonsei, the marital and emotional vulnerabilities of the chairman of the Hanseo Group, as though preparing a market report for a quarterly board. Halfway down the 2nd page, she had used a phrase that the audio system, at that precise moment, began to read aloud in her own recorded voice. "The wife is the problem, not the man. Remove the wife, and the man removes himself." The room did not gasp at the sentence. The room gasped at the voice. It was unmistakably hers. It was the voice she had used 4 hours earlier to thank the florists. Adaeze, in the doorway, did not move. From the 7th row, a woman in a navy hanbok, the wife of a senior prosecutor at the Supreme Prosecutor's Office in Siocho, rose to her feet and walked, without hurry and without apology, toward the exit. She did not look at the bride. She did not look at the groom. She looked, very briefly, at Adaeze, and she inclined her head 15 degrees, the small bow of acknowledgement one stranger gives to another at a funeral, when the deceased was known to both, but loved by neither. 3 more guests rose after her. By the time the screen had moved to the 6th image, the 7th row was empty, and the 8th had begun to thin like a tide pulling out. It was then, and only then, that Min Jae turned all the way around and looked across the length of the ballroom and saw his wife. He had not seen her face in 11 years and 4 months. He had told himself, on the nights when he allowed himself to tell himself anything at all, that he would not recognize her if he passed her on a street in Itaewon. He had been wrong about this the way he had been wrong about everything else. He recognized her before he recognized the dress. He recognized her before he recognized the coat. He recognized her by the way she was standing. The perfectly squared shoulders, the chin neither raised nor lowered, the stillness that, in their first apartment in Mapo 20 years ago, he had once told her looked like a woman waiting for a verdict she had already written, signed, and sealed. Her first words after 11 years and 4 months of silence were not addressed to him. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The ballroom had gone so quiet that her voice carried to the back of the room without any effort at all. "Finish it," she said to the screen, not to the room. "Show them the last one. If you are still here with us, pause for a single breath and tap subscribe to Midnight Love Saga. Ring the bell so the next chapter of this world finds you the moment it lands. What is about to happen in this ballroom will rearrange your understanding of loyalty in 4 places and rebuild it with something colder, sharper, and more human than what you walked in with. Stay in the room. You will want to be here for what comes next. And when this is finished, tell me one thing in the comments. Would you have stood at that door? Or would you have let the wedding finish? To understand what happened in that room, you have to go back 11 years and 4 months to a city that no longer exists in either of their memories the way it actually was. The city was Busan in the early autumn of 2014, and Adaeze Folake Okonkwo was 29 years old and 3 years into a fellowship in maritime law at a firm with offices on the 18th floor of a building that overlooked Gwangali Beach. She had come to Busan from Lagos by way of London, and to Lagos by way of a childhood in Enugu, in which her grandmother, a market woman who could neither read nor write Igbo, but could calculate compound interest in her head, while weighing a kilo of yam, had told her, every morning at 5:30 for 16 years, that the only inheritance a woman could not be robbed of was the one she carried in her own skull. Adaeze had taken the inheritance seriously. She spoke 4 languages by the time she was 22. Korean was her 5th, learned in 11 months in a small academy in Seomyeon from a teacher who, on the day of her final exam, told her he had taught the language to 140 foreigners, and she was the 3rd he believed would ever actually use it. She met Kang Min-jae at a noodle stall under the Gwangan Bridge on a Wednesday night in October. He was 36. He had a bandage on his left hand that was not quite hidden by the cuff of his shirt. He ordered ojingjeo bokeum and a bottle of soju, and asked her in Korean whether she was the lawyer who had filed the injunction that had cost his uncle a shipping container. She told him in Korean that she was, and that his uncle had imported 900 kilos of something he should not have imported, and that the injunction had not been personal. He had looked at her for a long time, and then he had laughed. A single, surprised laugh. The laugh of a man who had not been surprised by anything in a very long time. And he had said in English, "You are the first person in this city who has not lied to me in 4 years." He paid for her dinner. She let him. They were married 11 months later in a small ceremony in his mother's apartment in Mapo. The mother, a woman of 72 who had survived the dictatorship by selling rice cakes outside Seoul Station for 30 winters, took Adaze's face in both her hands and pressed her forehead against the forehead of her new daughter and said, in the Jeolla dialect of her birth village, that a foreign daughter was still a daughter if she could cook doenjang jjigae with anchovy broth. Adaeze learned to cook doenjang jjigae with anchovy broth. She learned to bow 45 degrees at the right moment and 90 degrees at Jiza for the ancestors. She learned to call her mother-in-law Aomeoni and to mean it. She learned in the small 2-bedroom apartment with the view of the Mapo Bridge to recognize the sound of her husband's footsteps on the 8th floor landing, and to know by the weight of the 3rd step whether the night had gone well, or whether something in the city had cost him something he was not yet ready to name. She built him. She would not have used the word, and he would not have admitted it, but she built him, brick by patient brick. She drafted the corporate structure of the Hanseo Group on a yellow legal pad on the kitchen table, while a pot of barley tea cooled on the counter beside her. She read every contract he signed for the first 6 years. She told him on a Tuesday in February of 2017 that the deputy at the Ministry of Land was not a man he could trust, and he told her, with the small edge that had begun to enter his voice that year, that she did not understand his world. 3 months later, the deputy was indicted. The Hanseo Group's port concession was extended by 11 years, and Min Jae did not say thank you. He had stopped saying thank you somewhere around the 4th year. She had stopped noticing somewhere around the 5th. The first sign was a second phone, one she did not know. The second sign was the way he began, around his 45th birthday, to mention his own reflection in mirrors. The third sign was the night he came home and smelled, faintly, of a perfume she had never bought, and when she asked him what perfume, he answered in the tone of voice a man uses when he has decided that the truth is no longer required in the room. The intercepted call came in May of the 11th year. She was not looking for it. She was looking for a phone charger. The call was on a tablet he had left open in the study, and the voice on the other end was a girl's voice, and the girl was laughing, and the laugh was the laugh of a person who had already counted the silver. Adaeze sat down on the floor of the study with the tablet in her lap and listened to the entire call. She did not cry. She listened. When the call was finished, she stood up, placed the tablet exactly where she had found it, walked to the kitchen, and finished cooking the doenjang jjigae she had begun 40 minutes earlier. He came home at 9:47 p.m. He ate 2 bowls. He told her the broth was perfect. She watched him eat, and she understood, with the clarity that is given only once to a person in a lifetime, that the man across the table from her was already gone, and that the only question remaining was the question of how she would arrange her own departure so that it would cost her nothing she still wanted to keep. The departure took 2 weeks. He filed for divorce on a Tuesday. By Friday, his lawyer had sent her a settlement offer she read once and laughed at. The dry, low laugh of a woman who had drafted better settlement offers in her sleep. She did not sign it. She countersigned a different document, prepared by her own counsel. A clean walkout, no alimony, no property, no public statement, in exchange for one single condition, written in the margin in her own hand, and initialed by Min Jae's senior counsel on the 11th of June. The right, at a time of her choosing, to retain and to use any and all materials she had legally gathered during the course of the marriage in defense of her own name. The senior counsel had not read the margin carefully. Min Jae had not read the margin at all. He had been on the phone with Cha Yu-na when he signed. On the night she left the apartment in Mapo, she stood for a long time at the kitchen window, with a glass of barley tea that had gone cold in her hand, and she said to herself, to the window, to the lit-up, indifferent shoulder of the city, "A woman who built a man does not have to burn him. She only has to stop holding him up." She did not know then that the sentence would become the second of the 7 sentences her life would be remembered by. She moved to a smaller apartment, also in Mapo, 2 stops further down the Orange Line. She took the job she had been offered 4 years earlier and refused, at a maritime compliance firm with offices in Uedo. She told no one her husband's name. She told no one she had ever been married. On Saturdays she walked the Gyeongui Line forest path from Hongik to Gajwa and back, and on Sundays she cooked for one. Her grandmother had been right. The inheritance she carried in her skull could not be robbed. It only had to be deployed. What he did not know, what no one in that ballroom knew, sitting under the canopy of 47,000 imported chrysanthemums and roses, was that the man who had told him she was harmless was sitting 3 seats to his left, drinking the same Hueyo 41. Seo Tai-hoon was 49 years old, and he had been Min Jae's sworn lieutenant since the night, 22 years ago, when the 2 of them had walked out of a basement in Yongsan with 1 knife between them and a debt to the Daegun Brotherhood that should have killed them both before sunrise. He called Min Jae Hyung-nim. He had never called him anything else. He had stood at the back of Min Jae's wedding to Adai's in 2015 and wept silently into his pocket square because he had loved her too, in the careful, never-spoken way that a sworn lieutenant is permitted to love the woman who feeds him hot soup when he is recovering from being stabbed for the 2nd time. He had been the one, in May of this year, who had walked into Min Jae's office on the 42nd floor of the Hanseo building and told him, in the flat voice of a man delivering a coroner's report, that the affair with Cha Yu-na was a setup, that her father had been a deputy at the Ministry of Land at the time of the original 300 million won transfer, that the relationship had been engineered from the first hesitation about the time of day, and that he had documents to prove every line of it. Min Jae had told him to leave the office. Min-jae had told him, in a voice Tae-hoon had not heard in 22 years, that if he ever spoke of his future wife in that tone again, the Brotherhood would be one man smaller by morning. Tae-hoon had bowed 45 degrees. He had left the office, and that same night, with a USB drive in the inner pocket of his coat and a manila envelope under his arm, he had gone to the small apartment in Mapo. Adaizi had opened the door. She had not been surprised to see him. She had made him barley tea. He had set the envelope on her kitchen table without a single word, and she had looked at it for a long time, and then she had said, "Thank you, Tae-hoon-si. Sit. Eat first." And he had sat, and he had eaten the doenjang jjigae she had cooked for one that had now become doenjang jjigae for two, and he had not used the word hyungnim once for the rest of the evening, because the man he had used it for 22 years, was no longer in the room. The 7th image dissolved into the 8th, and the 8th was the recording. The audio came on a half-second before the video. The room heard Cha Yuna's father speak first, a deep, comfortable, well-fed voice, the voice of a man eating dinner among people who would not interrupt him, saying in the lazy soul dialect of an old bureaucrat, "If you marry him, the empire is yours within 5 years. He is already half gone. The wife is the only obstacle, and the wife is a foreigner. The Brotherhood will not protect a foreigner forever." Then the daughter's voice, the same daughter now standing under 47,000 flowers, in a 10,000,001 dress, answering with the small, amused laugh of a girl confirming a dinner reservation. "Appa, I have been working on the wife problem for 2 years already. She will leave him before I do anything." The date stamp on the recording was the 14th of March, 3 years and 8 months before this evening. Cha Yu-na had been 22 years old. Min-jae had not yet met her. The dinner had taken place in a private room at a Hanok restaurant in Bukchon. The recording had been made by a waiter who had been paid in cash in the spring of 2024 by a woman in a charcoal coat who had asked him only one question: whether he remembered the table by the window, and the father, and the daughter, and what had been said. The ballroom was no longer a ballroom. It was a room that had once been a ballroom and would be remembered, by every guest who had not yet risen to leave, as a graveyard. The bride was sitting on the steps of the dais now, with her face in her hands, and she was not crying. She was calculating. Min-jae could see her calculating, and he understood in the part of himself that had not yet died on the parquet, that even now, even with her own voice playing in her own father's voice, through the speakers of the room she had chosen for her own wedding, she was still running the numbers on what could be saved. He understood in that moment that Adaizi had been right about her in the first 3 minutes of the first photograph, 11 years and 4 months ago, before the photograph had ever existed. He walked the length of the ballroom alone. No one followed him. Tae-hoon did not rise. The senior counsel did not rise. The retired Supreme Court Justice did not rise. 47,000 flowers watched him cross the floor. He stopped 3 feet in front of his wife. He did not bow. He did not speak. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and the look between them was the look of 2 people who had once built a city together with their own hands, and were now standing in the ruins of it on a cold November night, and one of them had set the fire, and the other was holding the only remote in the world that could turn off the wind. She handed him the manila envelope. She did not open it for him. She did not explain it. She placed it in his hands the way one places a sleeping child in the arms of its father, with the small, final transfer of weight that ends a conversation no one has spoken aloud. "There are 3 phases," she said quietly in Korean, and her Korean was still the careful, slightly accented Korean of a woman who had learned the language as an adult and had refused, out of pride and out of love, to ever pretend otherwise. Phase 1. You will resign as chairman of the Hanseo Group by the end of this calendar year. The seat goes to Tae-hoon. The codicil in your father's lawyer's safe in Jongno, the one you have not read since 2016, names him as successor in the event of your incapacity. Tonight is your incapacity. Phase 2. The apartment in Hanam-dong, the building in Cheongdam-dong, and the offshore account in Singapore are to be liquidated, and the proceeds placed in a trust administered by Aomione's youngest sister in Gwangju for the benefit of the children of Hanseo Group members who have died on your instructions in the last 22 years. I have the list. There are 14 names on it. You will sign the trust documents in front of a notary on the morning of the 23rd. Phase 3. She paused. She did not look away from him. Phase 3 is yours. I will not say it. You will know what it is when you stop running from it. The room heard her. Tae-hoon heard her. The retired justice heard her. Min-jae heard her, and his right hand closed around the envelope until the knuckles went the color of old paper. He did not cry. He did not raise his voice. He bowed. 90 degrees. The ceremonial bow, the one a Korean man performs at the grave of an ancestor, or in severe contrition before a parent he has wronged beyond ordinary apology. He held the bow for 11 seconds. When he straightened, she was already turning toward the door, and the manila envelope was still in his hands, and the watch on his wrist read 12:47 a.m. He returned to the 42nd floor of the Hanseo building 3 days later. He did not call ahead. He took the private elevator. The boardroom was already assembled because Tae-hoon had assembled it, the way Tae-hoon had quietly assembled everything for 22 years. The patriarch of the old guard, Chairman Yoon Sang-hyuk, 73 years old, 5'4", wearing the same horn-rimmed glasses he had been wearing on the night Park Chung-hee was shot, sat at the head of the long table because Yoon Sang-hyuk had always sat at the head of the long table. Min-jae did not ask him to move. Min-jae sat at the foot, which had not been done by a chairman of the Hanseo group since 1994, and which signaled, more clearly than any motion of the floor could have signaled, that the room he was about to dismantle was a room he had decided to leave standing without him in it. He spoke for 19 minutes. He did not raise his voice. He laid the envelope on the table. He opened it. He read aloud the wire transfer dates. He read aloud the names. He read aloud the codicil to his father's will, dated the 17th of June, 2009, in which the previous chairman, who had been Yoon Sang-hyuk's closest friend, had specified that Seo Tae-hoon, the boy from the basement in Yongsan, my son in everything but blood, was to succeed Kang Min-jae in the event that Kang Min-jae ever placed a woman not of the Brotherhood's choosing above the Brotherhood itself. Yoon Sang-hyuk had known about the codicil. Yoon Sang-hyuk had hidden it. Yoon Sang-hyuk had encouraged the affair with Cha Yu-na because Cha Yu-na's father had been bought by Yoon Sang-hyuk himself in October 14 years ago with the original 300 million won that had appeared in pixels of unbearable clarity on the screen at the wedding. Min-jae looked across the long table at the old man and asked one question. Halabeoji, he said, the word he had used for Yoon Sang-hyuk since he was 14 years old. Did she ever cash the check? Yoon Sang-hyuk did not answer for a long moment. The Mont Blanc 149 on the table in front of him did not move. The horn-rimmed glasses did not move. Then he closed his eyes, and he nodded, once, and he said, in the small voice of a man who has carried a stone for 14 years, and is at last setting it down on the ground. She returned it, the same week, uncashed, with a note. The note said, I do not need your money to raise my husband. I will raise him with my own hands, and when he is finished, he will be mine, not yours. I burned the note. I should not have burned the note. I am sorry, my boy. I am sorry I did not let her finish raising you. The boardroom was silent. Tae-hoon, standing at the wall, did not move. Min-jae stood up. He bowed 45 degrees to the old man. He left the seat at the foot of the table, and the codicil, and the envelope, and the Mont Blanc 149, exactly where they were, and he walked out of the room, and out of the building, and out of the only life he had been able to imagine for himself since the night in the basement in Yongsan 22 years before. It is the 11th day of his new life. The 2-bedroom apartment in Mapo is not his. He does not live in it. He has bought a smaller one, 3 stops further out on the Green Line. He cooks doenjang jjigae with anchovy broth on Sunday evenings, and he eats it alone, and the broth is not perfect. It is, by his own admission, half a degree too salty, and the anchovies have been simmered 11 minutes too long. He learns. He learns the way a man learns who has not had to learn anything in 22 years. Day 23. He stands in the lobby of the maritime compliance firm in Yeouido, At 6:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. He does not go up. He carries a paper bag with 2 pears from the market in Mapo, the small, hard, expensive ones Adaizi had liked in their first year of marriage. He leaves the pears at the front desk. He does not leave a name. The receptionist, a young woman of perhaps 25, looks at him for a long moment and says, in careful English, "She knows, sir." He bows 15 degrees. He leaves. Day 41. He attends the funeral of a man who died on his instructions in 2011. The man's daughter is 17 years old. He does not introduce himself. He places a single white chrysanthemum on the altar, bows 90 degrees, and leaves a brown envelope at the reception desk that contains the deed to a small apartment in Mapo, in her name, paid in full, with a note that says only, "For university," and for everything that comes after it. He signs the note with his given name, not his title. He has not used his title for 41 days. Adaizi does not move in with him. She does not take back his name. She does not accept the watch, which he has sent to her by courier with a single line in his own hand. It stopped on the night you left. I have not wound it since. She returns the watch by the same courier the next day, with a note of her own. "Wind it, Minjeshi. The time belongs to you now, not to me." She has called him by the polite suffix. She has not called him Opa, or Yobo, or anything they used to be in the small apartment with the view of the Mapo Bridge. He understands. He winds the watch. He sets it to 12:47 a.m. and lets it run forward from there. She does not call. He does not call. They write. Letters on paper in 2 languages, delivered by Tai-hoon, who has taken the chairmanship and reduced his own salary by 60%, and donated the difference to the trust in Gwangju. In one of the letters, late in the 11th week, she writes him a single sentence, in English, in her round, careful hand. "I built you once. I will not build you again. But I will let you finish building yourself, and I will read the letters you send while you do it, and that is the most I can promise any man at this point in my life." He folds the letter into 8. He keeps it in the inner pocket of his coat. He does not write back for 9 days, because he does not yet know what to say that is worth her reading. It is in the 12th week that the 3rd act turns. A Halmione arrives at his door. She is 78 years old. She is from Enugu, by way of Lagos, by way of London, by way of a small apartment in Mapo, where she has been quietly living for the last 3 years, in a building Adiz has been paying for, and has never mentioned. She is Adiz's grandmother, the market woman who could calculate compound interest in her head, who had taught her granddaughter that the only inheritance a woman could not be robbed of was the one she carried in her own skull. She does not speak Korean. She speaks Igbo and a clean, ringing, mission school English. She sits in Minjai's small kitchen, and she eats the doenjang jjigae he has cooked her, and she tells him in the patient voice of a woman who has buried a husband and 3 brothers that there is a child. The child is 10 years old. His name is Kang Jun Oluwaseyi. He was born in London on the 21st of January, in the year after Adaize left. He has Adaize's eyes and Minjae's left-handedness, and a small mole on the back of his right ear that Minjae's own mother had carried to her grave. Adaize had not told him. Adaize had not told anyone except the grandmother and Tai-hoon, who had known for 9 years and had said nothing, because Adaize had asked him to say nothing, and Tai-hoon's loyalty to Adaize had quietly outgrown his loyalty to Minjae somewhere around the 7th year. Minjae does not weep. He sits across the small kitchen table from the grandmother for a long time. He does not ask whether the boy knows. He does not ask whether the boy will want to meet him. He asks instead only one question, in his careful, slow English. "Halmione, what did she tell him about me?" The grandmother looks at him. She looks at him for a long time. She reaches across the table, and she takes his right hand in her 2 small, dry hands, and she says, "She told him that his father was a man who had lost his way, and that one day, if his father found the road back, the boy would be allowed to meet him on it. Not at the end of it. On it. Walking." She squeezes his hand once. "You are on the road, Minjae. You have been on it for 12 weeks. She has been watching." He does not go to London. He writes. He writes to the boy. He sends, with the first letter, a single photograph. Himself, age 10, standing in front of his mother's rice cake stall outside Seoul Station, holding a hard pear in his right hand. He writes in English so careful it has been checked 3 times by Tai Hoon. I have been a man for a long time, and a father for 10 years without knowing it, and I am writing to you not as your father, but as a man who would like, one day, to earn the word. He signs the letter Minjai, not Appa, not Abeoji. Minjai, the boy writes back. The letter arrives on a Tuesday. It is 4 lines long. The last line is in Korean, perfect textbook precise Korean, the Korean of a boy who has been learning a language in secret for a very long time. Yomioni said you would come when you were ready. I am 10 years old. I will wait. The final photograph, the one that runs in a single grainy column on the inside of the 17th page of the chosen Ilbo on the morning of the 23rd of the following March, is taken by no one in particular. It is a security still from a small cafe in Mapo, time-stamped 4:12 p.m. on a Saturday, with the date in the lower right corner. There are 3 people at the table, a woman in her late 40s in a charcoal coat, a man in his early 50s in a dark gray suit, the morning coat long since given away, a boy of 10 with his mother's eyes and his father's left-handedness, eating a bowl of jjajangmyeon with the small, intent concentration of a child for whom this is the first meal of its kind. The caption beneath the photograph, run in 3 languages, Korean, English, and Igbo, the last one set by a typesetter at the Chosen, who had to look up the diacritical marks in a reference book older than he was, reads, "Some empires fall, and some are quietly given away to the people who were owed them all along. A boy buries his enemy and pours himself a drink. A man buries the part of himself that thought he had any enemies worth burying, and pours the drink for someone else." Kang Min-jae had spent 22 years burying enemies. It took him 11 years and 4 months, a ballroom full of 47,000 flowers, a recording made by a waiter in Bukchon, and a small boy in London writing 4 lines on lined paper, to bury, at last, the boy in the basement in Yongsan, who had believed that the world owed him a future he had not yet earned. If you had been a Daiz, would you have stood at the door of that ballroom? Or would you have let the wedding finish and let him learn the harder way? Tell me in the comments. Stay for the next chapter. Tap the bell. Subscribe to Midnight Love Saga so the next one finds you the moment it lands. There are men in this city who are still mistaking the woman who built them for the woman who held them back. Their wedding nights are still coming. Some women leave. Some women wait. The ones who do both at the same time are the ones who decide, in the end, which men are remembered as kings and which are remembered as the lesson a king should have learned at 20.